On the morning of 6 July 1945, Dwight D Eisenhower stood alone in his headquarters office, staring at a map that no longer obeyed him. Outside the windows of Frankfurt, the war was officially over. Yet the peace ahead threatened alliances, forged in blood. Eisenhower felt the weight of millions behind his signature. Americans who had marched across Europe, believing command would remain unified forever. At the center of that belief stood Bernard Montgomery. Proud, defiant, brilliant. A man who expected history to bend. Montgomery was not present that day. Yet his shadow filled every corridor of Allied command, relentlessly. Weeks earlier, Eisenhower had promised balance between nations. Now that promise threatened American authority deeply. The decision forming in his mind would remove 300,000 American soldiers from Montgomery's control forever. This was not strategy alone, it was power, identity, and the future of post-war command. Eisenhower knew Britain would see betrayal, while Washington would demand firmness, resolve, and control. Across Europe, soldiers waited unknowingly, their fates shifting with ink and silence. The war had taught Eisenhower patience, but peace demanded something colder, harder, unforgiving. By nightfall, the order would be written, and the Allied world would quietly fracture apart. What began as a wartime partnership now edged toward rivalry, setting the stage for a controversial command decision that would echo globally. By 8 July 1945, the corridors of Allied headquarters hummed with restrained tension, whispered conversations, and careful glances. Eisenhower moved deliberately, measured in tone, yet inwardly braced for the political storm approaching fast. Montgomery had built his authority through victory, Normandy, the Rhine, and the belief that battlefield success justified expanded control. British officers saw him as indispensable. Americans increasingly saw him as obstructive, proud, and dangerously inflexible. The immediate issue was occupation zones, command hierarchy, and whose soldiers answered to whose authority. Montgomery believed his northern command should remain intact, including American armies now idle but strategically vital. Eisenhower disagreed quietly, firmly, convinced unified wartime command could not survive peacetime realities. Washington wanted American forces under American generals, accountable to American policy, not imperial prestige. London feared diminishing influence at the very moment victory should have secured Britain's global standing. Inside Eisenhower's briefing room, maps were rearranged subtly. Arrows shortened, borders clarified, responsibilities reassigned. Each movement of a pencil stripped Montgomery of leverage, while preserving diplomatic language on paper. Eisenhower framed the decision as administrative necessity, not personal judgment, though everyone sensed otherwise. Montgomery reacted with disbelief, then anger, convinced political caution had replaced military merit. He wrote letters, argued precedent, cited battlefield success, and appealed directly to Churchill's legacy. But Churchill was gone now, replaced by Attlee, and Britain's voice carried less weight. On 9 July 1945, Eisenhower signed the order, transferring 300,000 American soldiers back under U.S. command. No ceremony marked the moment. No announcement echoed through camps. Only silent bureaucratic execution. For Montgomery, it was humiliation disguised as restructuring, a personal loss masked by protocol. For Eisenhower, it was a necessary fracture, ensuring American sovereignty within the fragile post-war alliance. The decision closed one chapter of cooperation and opened another defined by mistrust, restraint, and cold calculation. Across Europe, soldiers sensed change, as familiar command voices disappeared, replaced by new authority. On 12 July 1945, Bernard Montgomery sat at his desk in Germany, reading the confirmation twice, slowly. The words were formal, restrained, almost polite. Yet they stripped him of command he believed earned. Montgomery had never doubted his value. Victories had shaped his identity, and now authority slipped away. To him this was not reorganization. It was judgment, delivered without a courtroom. British officers around him sensed the shift immediately. Confidence replaced by quiet unease. For months they had assumed wartime hierarchy would carry forward, preserved by shared sacrifice. Instead, peace arrived with new rules, written by those holding greater numbers and deeper resources. Montgomery's frustration hardened into resolve. Convinced history would vindicate his leadership, eventually. He spoke openly of American impatience, political overreach, and betrayal of Allied unity. Across the Atlantic, newspapers framed the change differently, emphasizing sovereignty, clarity, and post-war responsibility. American generals welcomed the decision cautiously, relieved yet wary of diplomatic fallout. Eisenhower understood this reaction, having weighed morale against alliance stability carefully. The soldiers themselves noticed smaller changes first. New insignia, revised orders, unfamiliar command voices. Units that once answered to Montgomery now realigned under American operational control, quietly. For many veterans, the war felt unfinished. Despite victory declared, uncertainty lingering. Eisenhower watched reports closely, aware that resentment could linger long after uniforms changed. He wrote privately that alliances survive wars, but rarely survive peace unchanged. Behind closed doors, British officials protested diplomatically, yet lacked leverage to reverse events. The empire was exhausted, economically strained, politically shifting, and increasingly dependent on American support. Montgomery realized the moment symbolized more than personal loss. It marked Britain's reduced global role. By mid-July, the decision had settled into routine, its shock absorbed, but not forgotten. What remained was a quiet fracture, shaping future cooperation, suspicion, and command dynamics. The Allied victory had been shared, yet control of its aftermath clearly was not. By 18 July 1945, the consequences of Eisenhower's decision began to ripple outward, beyond headquarters walls. In occupied Germany, command structures hardened, reflecting political realities rather than wartime necessity. American forces expanded administrative reach, overseeing logistics, reconstruction, and security with growing autonomy. British commanders adjusted reluctantly, adapting to diminished authority, while maintaining outward composure. Montgomery toured units with the same confidence as before, yet officers sensed something irrevocably altered. His presence still commanded respect, but his influence no longer shaped the wider Allied direction. Eisenhower, meanwhile, faced pressure from Washington to ensure discipline, efficiency, and clear national control. The emerging Cold War shadow already influenced thinking, though few spoke its name aloud. Soviet intentions in Eastern Europe concerned American planners, demanding unified U.S. command readiness. Shared Allied command now appeared risky, slow, and politically constrained in a divided continent. Eisenhower understood that future conflicts would not resemble the past war. Alliances would shift rapidly. The removal of American troops from Montgomery's control allowed faster coordination with U.S. policymakers. British leaders worried this signaled a permanent imbalance, where cooperation meant compliance. Behind closed doors, diplomats reassured each other, while privately preparing for reduced partnership equality. The public saw little of this tension. Victory celebrations still fresh, optimism widespread. Yet beneath parades and speeches, strategic trust quietly eroded. Montgomery's confidence in personal rapport gave way to resentment, tempered by discipline and restraint. He continued serving, outwardly loyal, inwardly convinced politics had trumped merit. Eisenhower carried the burden of the decision, knowing leadership often meant losing friends. History would later debate necessity, fairness, and ego, but in that moment practicality ruled. By late July, the command reshuffle felt permanent, a line drawn between wartime unity and peacetime reality. The Allies had won the war together, but now prepared to shape the world separately. On 23 July 1945, Eisenhower received reports from Berlin, And from Washington, in equal measure. They spoke of efficiency improving, lines clearer, and responsibility finally aligned with national policy. Yet between those lines lay diplomatic discomfort. Carefully softened, deliberately understated. British officials acknowledged the changes publicly, while privately warning of long-term consequences. Montgomery remained a symbol, proud, visible, but increasingly isolated within the Allied hierarchy. He attended briefings, offered counsel, and watched decisions pass him by, silently. For a man shaped by command, the loss was not merely professional, it was deeply personal. Eisenhower understood this. Having himself navigated compromise, pride, and political restraint throughout the war. Still, he believed American leadership required unmistakable authority, especially in unstable post-war Europe. The Soviet presence loomed larger each day. Borders hardening, intentions growing opaque. American planners pushed for rapid mobilization capacity, unencumbered by foreign command layers. The removal of troops from Montgomery's control allowed faster response planning and clearer accountability. In London, Parliament debated Britain's future role, empire, influence, and alliance dependence. The decision symbolized a shift many feared but could not prevent. Montgomery wrote privately of history's unfairness, yet publicly maintained discipline and decorum. He knew open defiance would only confirm American suspicions and weaken Britain further. Across occupied zones, soldiers adapted quickly, routine swallowing controversy. Most cared less for command politics, more for going home, rebuilding lives. Eisenhower watched morale reports closely, relieved stability held. Yet he also sensed a chapter closing, one defined by shared sacrifice and mutual trust. By late July, the alliance functioned, but intimacy was gone, replaced by formal cooperation. Victory had ended the war, but peace was rewriting relationships permanently. By 1 August 1945, the Allied facade of unity still stood, but its foundations had quietly shifted. Eisenhower traveled between commands, listening carefully, measuring reactions, and absorbing unspoken resentment. Every meeting carried politeness, yet beneath it flowed calculation, memory, and wounded pride. Montgomery remained outwardly composed, but his circle narrowed. Advisors fewer, influence reduced. British officers now spoke more cautiously, aware that American approval determined future authority. The war had crowned cooperation king, but peace crowned numbers, logistics, and economic power. Eisenhower understood this reality better than most. Having balanced coalition egos for years, he believed leadership meant anticipating tomorrow, not honoring yesterday's arrangements. In Washington, planners looked beyond Europe, toward Japan, and a rapidly reshaping global order. American command clarity in Europe freed resources, attention, and authority for the next phase. Montgomery saw this as abandonment, a subtle dismissal of British sacrifice and competence. Yet Britain itself was changing. Exhausted financially, politically transitioning, globally overstretched. The election at home had already signaled a new era, less imperial, more restrained. Eisenhower read these signals clearly, even if he never stated them publicly. For him, the decision was not anti-British, it was pro-American responsibility. He worried shared command in peacetime could paralyze response, invite confusion, and weaken resolve. The emerging rivalry with the Soviets demanded speed, unity, and unmistakable control. Montgomery, however, believed unity meant shared authority, not dominance by one partner. That philosophical divide now defined their relationship, unbridgeable and permanent. Soldiers noticed little of this high-level tension, focused instead on demobilization and home. Yet decisions made above them would shape decades. Borders, alliances, and future wars. By early August, the command shift was fully absorbed, routine replacing controversy. But memory lingered, shaping how Britain and America would cooperate and compete later. On 7 August 1945, news from the Pacific reached Europe, reshaping priorities overnight. The atomic strike on Hiroshima altered the meaning of power, speed, and command, globally. Eisenhower absorbed the reports quietly, understanding that the world had crossed a line. Future wars would not be managed by shared committees, but by decisive national authority. This reality reinforced his earlier choice, hardening his belief in clear American command. Montgomery watched these developments from afar, sensing the strategic ground shifting beneath him. The victory model he mastered, mass armies, careful planning, coalition patience, now felt dated. Air power, technology, and economic dominance redefined leadership in the emerging order. Britain's role, once central, now risked becoming consultative rather than commanding. Eisenhower did not celebrate this imbalance, but he accepted it as unavoidable. The alliance had been a marriage of necessity, not equality, in the long term. British officials quietly recalibrated expectations, focusing on influence through diplomacy, not command. Montgomery remained a respected figure, but increasingly symbolic rather than operational. His frustration turned inward, tempered by professionalism and loyalty to the crown. Eisenhower continued preparing occupation forces for an uncertain peace. Amid rising East-West tension, the Soviet presence in Berlin grew more assertive. Checkpoints tighter, intentions less ambiguous. American commanders valued speed of response, enabled by unchallenged authority. The earlier decision now paid dividends in clarity, at the cost of sentiment. History often demands such trade-offs, leaving pride bruised and alliances altered. By mid-August, the command question faded from headlines, replaced by atomic anxiety. Yet within military circles, the lesson endured. Power in peace belonged to those who could act alone. The Eisenhower-Montgomery rupture became a quiet precedent, shaping future coalition structures. What remained unsaid mattered most. Unity had limits, especially after victory. By 15 August 1945, the war officially ended. But certainty did not arrive with peace. Japan's surrender echoed across Europe, confirming that a new era had begun abruptly. Eisenhower watched celebrations unfold, knowing strategy now shifted from battlefields to borders. Occupation, influence, and ideology would define victory's true meaning. The earlier command decision now appeared less controversial, more prescient, in this new light. American authority in Europe allowed rapid adjustment to peacetime realities. Without coalition friction, Montgomery observed the moment with mixed emotion. Pride in Allied success, bitterness at exclusion. He had fought for unity, yet peace rewarded autonomy, not shared control. British forces settled into reduced roles, maintaining order, but not shaping grand strategy. Diplomats filled the gaps soldiers once occupied, treaties replacing offensives. Eisenhower faced mounting pressure to balance firmness with restraint, especially toward the Soviets. Clear command lines simplified response, but increased responsibility dramatically. Every decision now risked confrontation, miscalculation, or permanent division. Montgomery continued advocating consultation, warning that dominance bred resentment and instability. His words carried wisdom, yet lacked the power to redirect policy. Britain's economic strain limited its leverage, regardless of experience or sacrifice. The alliance endured, but as a structure of necessity, not equal partnership. Eisenhower understood this reality deeply, carrying it quietly, without triumph. Victory had not brought relief, only heavier burdens, and lonelier authority. The choice to strip command now defined his leadership in peace, as much as war. By late August, the shape of the post-war world emerged clearer, harder, divided. The seeds planted in July would grow into long-term arrangements, alliances, and tensions. What seemed administrative had proven transformational, quietly redrawing global power. On 2 September 1945, the formal surrender was signed, sealing the end of global war. Eisenhower read the reports with solemn focus, aware that victory settled little permanently. The command decision from July now felt distant, yet its consequences remained active. American forces solidified their presence, shaping Germany's future with decisive authority. British commanders cooperated professionally, though strategic influence stayed limited. Montgomery's role became advisory, respected, but no longer decisive. He accepted this publicly, while privately recording his frustration for history. Eisenhower sensed that future historians would question his choice, motives, and fairness. Yet he believed leadership demanded clarity, even at personal or diplomatic cost. The emerging divide with the Soviets intensified, borders hardening into ideology. American planners valued rapid decision-making, enabled by uncontested command structures. Shared authority in peacetime now seemed impractical, even dangerous. Montgomery warned that sidelining allies weakened trust and long-term unity. His concerns were noted, but momentum favored American dominance. Britain's post-war recovery consumed attention, limiting appetite for confrontation. The alliance transitioned into a different form, cooperative but asymmetric. Eisenhower watched Germany carefully, aware stability depended on balance and restraint. The command shift allowed unified American policy, but reduced Allied intimacy. Soldiers demobilized, returning home unaware of strategic precedents set above them. What had been decided quietly would influence NATO, Cold War structures, and coalition warfare. The July order became a template, not exception. By early September, the new order felt inevitable, normalized by routine. Victory had closed the war. But leadership choices now shaped peace's architecture. By 10 September 1945, the dust of victory had settled, revealing the true cost of command. Eisenhower reflected quietly on the choices made. Knowing history rarely forgives ambiguity. The removal of 300,000 American soldiers from Montgomery's control was now irreversible. What once seemed controversial had become institutional reality. Embedded in post-war structure, Montgomery remained a towering figure of the war. But his authority belonged to the past. He returned to Britain respected, decorated, yet aware influence had slipped permanently. Their conflict was never personal hatred, but competing visions of alliance leadership. Eisenhower believed unity required decisiveness. Montgomery believed unity required shared command. History sided with power, resources, and economic dominance. The Cold War hardened quickly, validating Eisenhower's insistence on clear national authority. NATO would later reflect this lesson. Coalition in name, American command in practice. Montgomery's warnings about resentment proved partially true. Tensions lingered beneath cooperation. Yet the alliance endured, shaped by necessity rather than sentiment. Eisenhower carried the burden of that decision into his presidency. Seasoned by consequence. Leadership, he learned, often meant choosing stability over friendship. The soldiers affected never knew their transfer shaped future doctrine. What happened in July was not merely administrative, it was foundational. The war ended with victory, but peace demanded hierarchy. Eisenhower's pen, steady and quiet, redrew the lines of power. Montgomery's pride bore the cost, and Britain's diminished role followed. Together they won the war, apart they shaped the peace. History would debate the fairness, but not the impact. The moment American command asserted itself, the modern Western alliance was born.